You're standing in a clearing somewhere around 15,000 BC. There are no churches, no wedding planners, no photographers crouching awkwardly in the bushes trying to get the perfect shot. No one is arguing over seating arrangements. No one is spending 6 months deciding between ivory and off-white table decorations. There isn't even a word for marriage, just a small group of hunter-gatherers gathered around a fire, watching two people sit beside each other, while the rest of the tribe quietly acknowledges something important. These two now belong together. And strangely enough, that simple moment may be the ancestor of every wedding that has ever happened since. Because here's the thing most people never think about. Marriage is older than civilization. It's older than writing. It's older than cities. It's older than kings, temples, taxes, and governments. In fact, marriage is so old that it might predate agriculture itself. Long before humans built pyramids or invented beer, they were already forming pair bonds, raising children together, and creating social rules around relationships. The real question isn't when humans invented marriage. The real question is why? Because from an evolutionary perspective, marriage is actually kind of weird. Most mammals don't do it. Most animals reproduce and move on. Yet humans evolved something remarkably different. And to understand why, we have to go back much further than most people expect. Let's start with a simple biological problem. Human babies are terrible at being babies. Seriously. Compared to almost every other animal on Earth, human infants are absurdly helpless. A foal can walk within hours. A giraffe can run within a day. A newborn human can barely hold its own head up for years. This creates a massive survival challenge. Raising a human child requires an enormous amount of time, energy, food, protection, and cooperation. Anthropologists have argued for decades that one reason humans developed long-term pair bonds was because children benefited enormously from having multiple adults invested in their survival. Not necessarily because people were romantics, not because they were writing love poems, but because raising children alone was incredibly difficult. Love may be ancient, but practicality is ancient too, and sometimes the two work surprisingly well together. Now, here's where things get interesting. The earliest humans almost certainly didn't have weddings, at least not in the way we imagine them. There was no priest standing between two people, no legal contract, no government-issued certificate, no uncle getting drunk and making everyone uncomfortable during the reception. Instead, most anthropologists believe early pair bonds were recognized socially rather than legally. The tribe knew, the group acknowledged it, and that was enough. In small hunter-gatherer societies, everybody knew everybody. There were no strangers, no giant cities, no databases, no need for paperwork. If two people formed a partnership, everyone around them witnessed it happen naturally. The community itself was the record. Which sounds surprisingly efficient until you remember that your entire social life consisted of about 40 people and you couldn't mute any of them. Now, imagine living 10,000 years ago. You've spent months hunting alongside someone, gathering food, sharing shelter, protecting each other during harsh winters. Eventually, the relationship becomes obvious. Nobody needs an announcement. Nobody needs a Facebook status update. Everybody already knows. In many ways, the first marriages may have looked less like ceremonies and more like gradual social recognition. A relationship became a marriage because the group treated it as one. And honestly, that's probably how most institutions start. Someone does a thing. Other people accept the thing. Eventually, someone writes down rules about the thing. Then, thousands of years later, everyone forgets it started that simply. But if marriage began as a practical arrangement, when did weddings appear? The answer is agriculture. And agriculture changes everything. Around 12,000 years ago, humans began settling down. Farming emerged. Villages appeared. Population exploded. For the first time in history, people started accumulating wealth. Not wealth in the modern sense. Nobody was buying sports cars, but they owned land, animals, stored grain, tools, resources. And suddenly, a new problem emerged. Who gets all this stuff when I die? The moment humans started owning property, marriage became much more than a relationship. It became an economic institution. Inheritance mattered. Family alliances mattered. Land ownership mattered. Marriage was no longer just about two people. It was about families, sometimes entire communities. This is where many of the earliest formal wedding customs begin to appear. Ancient Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, gives us some of the earliest written records of marriage. And those records are surprisingly practical. People often imagine ancient weddings as mystical ceremonies filled with symbolism. Some certainly were, but many surviving documents read more like business agreements. Who owns what? Who inherits what? Who is responsible for what? Romance existed. Humans have always fallen in love. But paperwork had officially entered the chat. And paperwork, as history repeatedly demonstrates, never leaves. The ancient Egyptians took a somewhat different approach. Marriage existed. Families mattered. Inheritance mattered. But many couples simply began living together and were considered married. No massive state ceremony required, no elaborate legal process. In some periods of Egyptian history, moving into the same household was effectively enough, which means one of humanity's greatest civilizations occasionally handled marriage with the legal complexity of, yeah, they live together now. Honestly, there's something refreshingly straightforward about that. Then we arrive in ancient Rome. And Romans, being Romans, had opinions about everything. Roman marriages could involve contracts, ceremonies, witnesses, property transfers, family negotiations, and social obligations. Because if there's one thing Romans loved, almost as much as conquering territory, it was creating administrative procedures. A Roman could probably turn breakfast into a legal framework, if given enough time. Yet despite all these differences, something fascinating appears again and again across ancient cultures. Symbols. Humans love symbols. A shared meal, a gift, a public declaration, holding hands, exchanging objects, wearing special clothing. Across thousands of years and countless civilizations, people kept inventing rituals that served the same purpose. They told the community, this relationship is real. Not because the couple didn't know, because everyone else needed to know too. Marriage has always been partly private and partly public. Two people make the commitment. The community witnesses it. That's the pattern that keeps repeating. Whether you're in a prehistoric camp, an Egyptian village, a Roman city, or a modern wedding venue charging questionable amounts for flowers, the structure remains surprisingly familiar. And then there's love. Because whenever people talk about ancient marriage, someone inevitably says, back then, people didn't marry for love. That's not entirely true. Humans have been writing love poetry for thousands of years. The oldest surviving love poems date back over 4,000 years. People fell in love. People got heartbroken. People obsessed over someone who didn't text back. Okay, not that last one. But emotionally, ancient humans weren't different from us. They worried. They desired. They hoped. They suffered. Their technology changed. Their emotions didn't. What changed was the role love played in marriage. In some societies, it was central. In others, it was secondary. But it never completely disappeared. Because no matter how practical marriage became, humans remained human. And humans are remarkably good at complicating practical arrangements with feelings. Now, here's perhaps the strangest realization of all. For most of human history, marriage wasn't primarily about the couple. Today, we tend to think of marriage as an individual choice, a personal decision, a romantic commitment. Historically, that would have sounded unusual. Marriage often connected families, clans, communities, and economic networks. The couple mattered, but they weren't the only people involved. Modern marriage is, in many ways, one of the most individual-focused versions of marriage humans have ever created. Which means that if an ancient farmer, Roman citizen, or Mesopotamian merchant attended a modern wedding, they might find it surprisingly familiar and completely bizarre at the same time. The vows? Recognizable. The celebration? Recognizable. The idea that two people simply chose each other because they wanted to? That might take some explaining. So, when did ancient humans get married? The honest answer is that they probably always formed some version of marriage. Not because a king invented it, not because a religion created it, not because a government issued a certificate, but because humans needed stable relationships, cooperative parenting, and social structures long before civilization existed. The idea that two people simply chose each other because they wanted to, that might take some explaining. So, when did ancient humans get married? The honest answer is that they probably always formed some version of marriage. Not because a king invented it, not because a religion created it, not because a government issued a certificate, but because humans needed stable relationships, cooperative parenting, and social structures long before civilization existed. The ceremonies came later, the contracts came later, the rings came later. The flowers, the cakes, the speeches, the awkward dancing, the distant relatives you only see once every 5 years. All of that came much later. The foundation was already there. Two people choosing to build a life together, while the community recognized that choice. That idea is ancient, older than cities, older than writing, older than history itself. And somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, beside a fire under a night sky untouched by electric lights, two humans probably sat next to each other, while the rest of their group quietly understood what was happening. No wedding dress, no wedding band, no official ceremony, just a simple human promise. And from that moment, everything else grew.